Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the truly profound work of Dr. Gabor Maté. He's a physician whose own life story led him to a revolutionary idea that our deepest struggles, things like anxiety, depression, addiction, they aren't actually who we are. Instead, they're just echoes of old wounds, wounds we've probably long forgotten. So let me just start by asking you this. Do you ever get that feeling that you're not fully in the driver's seat of your own life? Kind of like some invisible force is pulling the strings, pushing you into the same old patterns you just can't seem to break? Maybe for you it shows up as just relentless workaholism. Or maybe it's those flashes of anger that feel way out of proportion to what just happened. Or maybe it's an addiction that gives you at least a temporary escape. Well, Dr. Mate argues these are not character flaws. Not at all. They're clues. They're like breadcrumbs leading us back to a much deeper story. And what's so often at the very heart of that story is a single fundamental wound. This deeply ingrained feeling of just not being good enough. And that one feeling, wow, it can shape our entire existence. To really get this, really get it, we have to go back to Dr. Mate's own beginning. He was just an infant in Nazi-occupied Hungary. His mother, totally desperate, called their pediatrician for help. And that was the doctor's reply. Just try to imagine the terror, the grief that filled the very air a tiny baby was breathing. And here's the absolute key insight from Maté. An infant's brain takes everything personally. See, when a mother is constantly stressed and grieving and terrified, the baby can't understand the world around them. They just feel all that distress. And their only way to make sense of it is to think, it must be my fault. I'm not good enough to make my mother happy. And for Maté, he realized this was the very origin of a wound that would echo through his entire life. So that incredibly personal experience, well, it led him to completely redefine one of the most misunderstood words in our language, trauma. This, right here, is the core of his work. We usually think of trauma as the terrible event itself, the war, the abuse, the accident, but Maté says, no, the event isn't the trauma. The trauma is the wound that's left inside you. It's the disconnection from your true self, it's the negative beliefs you form about yourself, and it's all the coping mechanisms you have to build just to survive it all. Now, this trauma can take a couple of forms. We all recognize what he calls big T traumas, right? The obvious horrific events. But just as powerful, and way, way more common, are these small T traumas. And these can happen even in the most loving homes. It's when a child's core emotional needs, the need to be truly seen and heard and accepted for who they are, aren't consistently met. And often that's because the parents themselves are carrying their own unhealed wounds. But the result is the same. The child is still left wounded. And look, these internal wounds, they don't just, stay neatly tucked away in the past. They echo. They echo all through our adult lives, shaping our behaviors, our relationships, and believe it or not, even our physical health. Now, you might be thinking, hold on a second, that seems like a bit of a stretch. How can an emotional wound from when you were 5 show up as a physical illness decades later? Well, the answer is in the absolutely fascinating science of the mind-body connection. All right, check out this incredible study from McGill University. It's wild. Researchers watched 2 groups of mother rats. One group was super nurturing, always licking and grooming their babies. The other group, not so much. While the babies of the nurturing moms, they grew up to be calm, resilient adults. The babies of the less attentive moms grew up anxious and stressed. And here's the absolute kicker. It wasn't genetic. The quality of care they got as infants determined their future. Nurturing literally changed their brain chemistry and how their stress genes were expressed. So what's the big takeaway here? It's undeniable. Our emotional environment, especially when we're very young, has a direct, measurable impact on our biology. The mind and the body aren't 2 separate things. They're one single interconnected system. And unresolved psychological pain translates directly into chronic physical stress. It keeps our nervous system on high alert, flooding our bodies with hormones like cortisol. And over time, that just wears the body down. It's just science. And this is how all those pieces click together. So that feeling of, I'm not enough, that started way back when, that's what can drive you to become a workaholic. Always chasing that next achievement to feel worthy. An addiction? It's often not a choice, but a desperate attempt to soothe an unbearable internal pain. That crazy anger that explodes in a relationship? It's usually that old wound being touched, making you feel rejected or unworthy all over again. And chronic illness? So often, it's the body finally screaming what the mind has been forced to keep quiet. And Maté boils it down to this one question that just reframes everything. Instead of judging the behavior, the addiction, the anger, whatever, we get curious about the suffering that's driving it. The addiction isn't the real problem. It's just a tragic attempt to solve a much deeper one. Okay, so if trauma is the wound and all these behaviors are just the symptoms, what's the way out? What's the path forward? Well, that is the most hopeful part of this entire story. There is a path to wholeness. Mate has this incredible metaphor for it. He says trauma is like a puppet master. For most of our lives, it's unconsciously pulling our strings. We react, we get angry, we shut down, and all the while we think we're making free choices. But in reality, we're just dancing to a very, very old tune.
So the healing journey, it really starts with 3 huge steps. First, awareness. This is just seeing the puppet master. It's that moment you finally notice the pattern and you can say, aha, that reaction, that's not about what's happening now. That's an old string being pulled. Second, authenticity. This is about reconnecting with the real feelings you had to bury as a kid just to be accepted. And then number 3, agency. And honestly, this is the real game changer. It's when you finally realize that even though you were helpless then, you are not helpless now. You have the power to choose a brand new response.
You see, healing isn't about erasing the past or just getting back to normal. It's about liberation. It's about cutting those strings and finally being free to live as your authentic self, right here in the present, no longer controlled by the ghosts of the past. So, we want to leave you with this one final thought. The wound was not your fault. It was created by circumstances that were way beyond your control as a child. But your healing? That is your creation. That's your masterpiece. It's your path to freedom. So the only question left is, what will you choose to create with it?